The story of Texas Baptists Committed is the story of thousands of Texas Baptists working together. Thousands who were alerted to a threat, kept informed, and then acted to keep Texas Baptists free of fundamentalist control. Fundamentalists were able to take control of the Southern Baptist Convention because they were comfortable with secular, precinct-style politicking, going for the jugular, as Paul Pressler put it, and moderates were not. In 1993, Walter Buddy Sheridan edited a book entitled The Struggle for the Soul of the SBC, Moderate Responses to the Fundamentalist Movement. Jimmy Allen wrote the chapter on Baptists Committed. He had been the outgoing SBC president at the 1979 convention meeting in Houston, at which fundamentalists elected Adrian Rogers as the first president in their takeover campaign. In the mid-1980s, Jimmy Allen was one of the leaders in organizing moderates to respond. But Allen recounted the story of a group that was slow to respond, having been assured by political observers that the sudden ascendancy of extremist fundamentalism would soon be counterbalanced by the efforts of more responsible elements. What those observers didn't count on, however, was what Allen called the pernicious and persistent commitment of fundamentalists living up to the nature of their worldview. Few moderates, he wrote, could really believe that secular political methods had been adopted and applied. At this point, it's important to recognize that the reality of 30 years ago is the reality of today. In recent years, we at TBC have heard from members of Texas Baptist churches in which fundamentalists have used secular and devious means to install dictatorial pastors and then take the church from the Baptist General Convention of Texas, a leader in starting new churches, providing education through 9 universities, and providing services and ministries to Baptists in Texas, to Baptists and others in Texas and worldwide, to the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention, a fundamentalist convention begun in the late 1990s that provides next to nothing in comparison. In the 1980s, moderates lost a convention. In 2011, we are losing churches. Churches being intentionally torn apart, with members of those churches being pitted against each other by those seeking control. Jimmy Allen wrote that in the mid-1980s, moderate mainstream Baptists finally began waking up and taking action. In Walter Sheridan's 1993 book, The Struggle for the Soul of the SBC, Moderate Responses to the Fundamentalist Movement, Jimmy Allen wrote about the beginnings of Baptists Committed. It was only after the 6th consecutive election of a fundamentalist president at the 1984 SBC meeting that moderates finally acknowledged they were in serious trouble. This meeting, Allen wrote, created an awareness that sparked action. At this point, moderates still rejected any talk of going public with a formal political action organization, but informal coalitions of moderates were busy organizing groups in every state, engendering, in Allen's words, the genuine hope of victory. Then, of course, came the 1985 SBC meeting in Dallas, which I discussed last week, at which President Charles Stanley, as convention chair, falsely represented the wording of an SBC bylaw and issued a ruling based on his own misrepresentation to put an end to any realistic attempts by moderates to turn back the fundamentalist tide. The Dallas Convention, Allen wrote, was a killing blow to moderate hopes. After that, public political activity became more a part of moderate reality. John Baugh, a Texas businessman and committed Baptist layman, founded the Baptist Laity Journal, aided by a board of other interested Baptist laymen. In September 1986, Baugh and several others asked to meet publicly with fundamentalist leaders for the purpose of restoring fellowship, but fundamentalists refused to meet with them. Shortly afterwards, Baugh and his group began holding public meetings to which they invited any who shared their concerns regarding fundamentalism. It was in a meeting in December 1988 at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Allen wrote, that Baptists committed to the Southern Baptist Convention, popularly known simply as Baptist Committed was founded. Winfred Moore, pastor of First Baptist Church Amarillo, was named to chair the new organization which absorbed the Baptist Laity Journal. A national office was opened in Houston in January 1989. That April, the first state chapter of Baptist Committed was formed in Georgia. Less than a week later, a second one followed in Texas. At the end of yesterday's Baptist brief, it was the middle of April 1989, and Texas had just organized the second state chapter of Baptist Committed to the Southern Baptist Convention. 2 weeks earlier, on March 28th, Chairman Winfred Moore stated, "Baptist Committed to the SBC is an organization committed to returning our convention to its historic basis of cooperation in missions, education, and evangelism, thus ending this 10-year period of disunity." In Walter Buddy Sheridan's book, The Struggle for the Soul of the SBC, Moderate Responses to the Fundamentalist Movement, Jimmy Allen wrote, "The new organization had David Curry of San Angelo as its first staff person. His title was Field Coordinator. Ouida Batorf of Houston was Project Director." In November 1989, Winfred Moore stepped down as chair and Jimmy Allen was elected to take on that responsibility. Baptist Committed supported Daniel Vestal for president of the SBC in 1990. His overwhelming loss to Morris Chapman in New Orleans, as we discussed last week, in effect gave fundamentalists majority control of all SBC boards and committees. Allen wrote that the next morning, June 13th, Daniel Vestal did an excellent job of placing the challenge before us at a Baptist Committed breakfast meeting. Attendance at the breakfast exceeded 800. We set to work. At this time, a new missions organization for moderate Baptists was being discussed, and Baptist Committed leaders quickly determined that a critical part of their mission was to assure the existence and usefulness of this new missions tool, which ultimately became the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. In CBF's infancy in the early 1990s, Texas Baptist Committed was the functioning unit of CBF in Texas. But many churches that were not yet comfortable with aligning with CBF were nevertheless committed to moderate control of their state convention and were a part of the Baptist Committed organization. Many Baylor University alumni and friends were also an integral part of Texas Baptist Committed, with Herbert Reynolds, then president of Baylor, taking an active leadership role from its beginning. In Walter Sheridan's book, The Struggle for the Soul of the SBC, Moderate Responses to the Fundamentalist Movement, Jimmy Allen described David Curry's key role as field coordinator of Texas Baptist Committed in its early years as that of organizing moderates to prevent fundamentalists from gaining control of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. Curry had previously served the National Baptist Committed organization in the same role for states west of the Mississippi. At TBC, David Curry proved uniquely effective at framing the issues at stake and motivating moderates in Texas to get involved. But he also built an organization that proved remarkably effective at turning out the moderate vote for BGCT elections. Allen wrote that the 60-40 vote in favor of the moderate cause at the 1991 Texas Convention was assured and predicted by Texas Baptist Committed zone leaders. Keep in mind that just as surely as the 1980s were a battle for the control of the SBC, the 1990s were a battle for control of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. The BGCT was to be the next jewel in the fundamentalist crown. But this time, moderates were determined to make a strong stand for freedom. Politics had been the fundamentalist turf, but this time, moderates joined the fray. Moderates weren't about to let fundamentalists gain a point of power over boards and committees in Texas as they had over those in the SBC. So throughout the 1990s, Texas Baptist Committed, under David Curry's leadership, endorsed and actively promoted candidates for BGCT office. TBC breakfasts held at the site of the BGCT meeting brought out hundreds annually to hear speakers of national renown, such as Richard Jackson and Bill Moyers. In 1993, TBC began publishing a newsletter several times a year presenting articles on current Baptist news and issues, historic Baptist principles, and candidates for BGCT office, including TBC's endorsements. David Curry and others traveled the state widely and regularly, keeping churches and pastors informed of the issues at stake and the personalities involved. At its beginning, Texas Baptist Committed's primary mission, and that of field coordinator David R. Curry, was to organize moderates to prevent a fundamentalist takeover of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. Yesterday, I detailed activities organized by Curry to defeat fundamentalists in BGCT officer elections and votes on critical issues. Elections were closer in some years than in others. Nevertheless, year after year, moderate candidates won office and moderate positions prevailed on critical issues. In 1993, Gerald McBride, pastor of First Baptist Church San Angelo, won 67% of the vote to defeat Wayne Allen for the presidency. At the same meeting, messengers rejected attempts by fundamentalists to reduce funding to Baylor University and to totally defund the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs. This trend continued through the next few years. In 1997, Russell Dilday, fired 3 years earlier as president of Southwestern Seminary by fundamentalist trustees, received over 71% of the vote in winning the BGCT presidency. In 1998, Dilday was re-elected by acclamation in Houston. Later that same week, fundamentalist leaders, apparently conceding defeat in their decade-long attempt to take control of the BGCT, met in a Houston church to form the Southern Baptists of Texas Convention. At the Texas Baptist Committed breakfast at the BGCT that week, Herbert Reynolds, by then Chancellor and former President of Baylor University, warned moderate Baptists that fundamentalists would never abandon their quest for power and control, and challenged them to remain vigilant in fighting the fundamentalist threat to Baptist freedom. Today, we at TBC continue to take up Herbert Reynolds' challenge, for he has been proven right many times over. Fundamentalists at the national level have continually tightened the criteria for membership, leadership, and service in Southern Baptist life. And TBC has received calls repeatedly from members of numerous churches that fundamentalists in Texas have deceived into calling a dictatorial pastor who has then taken them out of the BGCT and into the Southern Baptists of Texas Convention. Constant vigilance, with David Curry and Texas Baptist Committed leading the way, kept the BGCT free, and only constant vigilance will keep Texas Baptist churches free. Texas Baptists need a strong Texas Baptist Committed, and we need your financial support and active personal involvement.